guys? Welcome back to U.S. History. Here we are kicking off quarter 3 and a brand new topic. Honestly, one of my all-around favorite ones. I always have liked World War II, and typically I'll say that is like the one topic that basically everybody knows something about it coming into my class. Not saying you're an expert, or every now and then I do have some students come in that know a lot about World War II. But even if you're that person that doesn't like history, it's your least favorite subject, and you're not that into, hearing the stories or into wars, almost everybody, even that student, usually can tell me a little something about World War II. You might be sitting there right now just kind of shaking your head like, I don't know nothing about it. But think, Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, the Holocaust, what happened to Jews, Pearl Harbor, etc., etc. There's just so many things, and so many movies have been made about it, and it's been covered in pop culture. Really, even if you're not thinking you do, I bet you'd surprise yourself with what you can recall and what you do know about World War II. So if you like history, if you like covering the war units, if you like World War I, this unit's going to be for you. I'll say it's also probably if I had to pick one topic that I covered through all of my history curriculum that had the most impact on the world, that was the most kind of just shaking things up and changing the world, World War II definitely walks away with it. We still feel the echoes of it today. World War II has definitely, from borders to conflicts that are still playing out today, political strife kind of going on that we're seeing, really kind of all over the world. A lot of that has its origins back to World War II. I'll get more into that down the road. So here we go, though. I had also gave you a quick instructional video today that if you haven't watched that yet, pause this right now and go back and watch the Why We Take Notes video. I think that's a pretty important one kicking off semester 2. One thing I realized and going through first semester was that a lot of students talked to me and said that they did take notes and it was pretty handy for them, and that helped them out. But I had even more comments say, man, I didn't really take notes and I wish I would have. I think I would have done better on the exam or done better on the quizzes and overall classwork. Go watch that video if you haven't already, the Why We Take Notes one, and then give it a practice today. I'm going to purposely keep this would probably the whole intro to World War II lecture PowerPoint that I'm doing right now. I was planning originally to do that in just one chunk that would be 25 minutes or so long. Instead, I'm going to break it up into 2 parts because I did that instructional video today too. So it's going to be a little bit briefer. I'm going to try to keep it to about 10 to 15 minutes here. But I want you, if you haven't already, get a piece of paper out. Hopefully you maybe have a spiral notebook or just even some loose leaf lined paper, whatever works for you, and label it out at the top, World War II, or maybe in this case, Intro to World War II. This is because we're going to take quite a few notes on the whole topic of World War II, and we're going to be covering it for over the next month. You want to have organized notes, have good headings. So this will be the introductory stuff. This is what's kind of setting the scene for the war. We're not really getting into the actual conflict today, but I'm going to get into the Nazi rise to power and kind of just setting the stage for you in Europe. Now, we call it a world war because this one truly was a world war where fighting was happening all around the globe, all different, every continent except Antarctica saw some sort of fighting. So more of a true world war than World War I was, which World War I, if you remember back to that, the way I covered it, it was really a conflict just in Europe that America joins into. Not going to be the case in World War II. It's way more widespread. So it's not fair to say that all the origins of the war began in Europe with the Nazis, because if you're a Chinese person, or if you're Asian or Oriental, they're going to have a totally different perspective because there's a whole nother war basically playing out over in the Pacific theater and in Asia with Japan. So later this week or early next week, I'm going to get into that whole backstory too. That'll be kind of coming up next. But first things first, we're going to start with Hitler and the Nazis and their rise to power. Now, images that I have on the screen right now, hopefully some of those look a little familiar to you. Top left corner over here, if you follow my cursor, what's that? the atomic bomb, that's the end of the war, right? Kind of going to like the last scene of the war, where dropping the 2 atomic bombs on Japan, that's what's going to finally end the conflict and kind of sort of bring peace back to the world. Have any of you seen this photo, the top one where my cursor's at right now, the Americans planting the flag? I would imagine, but most of you have probably seen that image before. That took place also out in the Pacific theater of the war, and a little island called Iwo Jima. And this iconic photo just happened to be snapped. It wasn't staged or anything. These guys really got to the top of this dormant volcano called Mount Suribachi, and these guys are planting the American flag together there. And actually, that photo was just randomly taken, and then the U.S. started using it for propaganda, and it's actually the most reprinted photograph in all of human history. So I imagine probably most of you have seen that image before. They've actually made a couple movies about it. One of them I'll probably use a little snippet of later on. How about these 2 guys? Most everybody knows the one standing out front here, Adolf Hitler with the big swastika on his arm. Can any of you pick out who's that guy to the right of him? Give you a second to think. That is Adolf's best buddy, Benito Mussolini, who was actually kind of like the Adolf Hitler prototype in some ways. He had rose to power in Italy, was also a fascist dictator like Adolf Hitler. And Hitler was actually, before he came to power, he was watching what Mussolini was doing in Italy and thinking, man, this guy's got some good ideas. And then he kind of perfects the fascism. Maybe, I don't know if that's the right use of the word for it, but he kind of takes it up to the 2.0 level and is more successful at it than Mussolini, and kind of surpasses this guy who was the Italian dictator that was kind of Hitler's mentor. Down low here, this is the Nazi regime at the height of its power in roughly like mid-1942. Everything that's in the darker gray was what they controlled over in Europe. And at that point in the war, it looked like the Germans were going to walk through basically Europe and Asia and kind of kick butt and win the war. The planes right here, those are some British Spitfires. We'll get into that whole story coming up soon too. But enough just yapping about different photographs and explaining my imagery on the first slide. Here we go. This is the stuff that I'd want you to start getting into your notes. Now, if you remember from my Why We Take Notes video, you don't need to write every single thing I have down from every slide. The best note takers will listen to the presenter. They'll follow along. They're looking and reading those bullet points too, as the presenter, as I am talking to you. And then the things that I emphasize, and there will actually be some things that I don't have written down there that I'm going to tell you, hey, write this in here, because this is going to be a test or a quiz question. Is also going to be important. So the best way to take notes, have your notepad out, have your pen or pencil handy, just kick back, listen to me present, and then when I emphasize things, you'll jot in a very short, like little bullet point. It could be just a little sentence fragment or a phrase or something that'll help jog your memory later on. But it's most important, I'd rather have you listening to what I'm saying than just trying to write down every single thing I say or all the words on the slide. Okay? Okay, so Hitler and the Nazi rise to power. We go back to the end of World War I. All right? Germany had lost. It was a humiliating defeat. The German people, after almost 5 years of war, they're starving to death. Their economy is in ruins. They've lost literally millions of young men. It's a bad situation. Like, think World War I was one of those wars that I said really nobody won. It was losers on both sides. It was a war where nobody really won anything. America came out looking the best, but all of the European powers that had fought in that stalemate for years, they really all lost. They lost in terms of lives, but also in just devastating their economies and their countries. Germany, of course, was the worst off because it literally did come out on the losing end of it, and had been outnumbered and just had its butt kicked and gotten hammered for years and years. Now, Hitler, Adolf Hitler, was actually a veteran in World War I. A lot of people don't know his backstory. You might want to jot a few of these things down, but Hitler actually was not a native German. He was born in Austria, which is the country right to the south of Germany. It's also a German-speaking country, okay? When the war broke out, though, Hitler didn't have a very high opinion of the Austrian army, probably for good reason. They were very backwards. We didn't cover them much when I was hitting that unit, but the Austrian army was a total mess. So Hitler didn't want to fight with that ragtag bunch, but Germany had a top-notch, first-rate army, and Hitler he took pride and felt like all the German people should be in one unified Germany together. His dream was to combine Austria, Germany, and other parts of Europe and make one kind of fatherland that all the German-speaking peoples would be, housed together in one nation. So Hitler, knowing that Germany is a far superior army, he actually goes up into Germany. He kind of like renounces his Austrian citizenship, joins the German army, which they were recruiting guys right and left, and they're getting ready to fight this big war. So Hitler actually fought basically through the whole war from start to finish. Somehow he survives, because a lot of the guys that were out there in 1914, they did not make it through to the end. Now, I always ask kids, what kind of soldier do you think Hitler was? Was he a guy that, liked to start wars, but was kind of a coward, was hiding in the trenches, was, a snaky guy like that? Or what do you think his overall experience was? How was he as an actual soldier back before he was the leader guy? Well, this actually usually surprises most kids, but he was actually a pretty good soldier. By all the accounts that I've read about him and stories that I've listened to like history teachers tell, he was a pretty darn brave soldier, and he was very loyal to Germany. He was loyal to the cause. He was a true believer that Germany was the best country on earth and was destined to have the biggest empire and win this war. He actually put his life in harm's way. He almost got killed multiple times in the war. He was injured multiple times. When you listen to guys talk to him, or what guys said that were in his unit that knew him, their story about him is basically that he was kind of a weirdo, a little bit of an outcast. He was socially awkward. He didn't really fit in with the rest of the guys, but they also all say he was a brave soldier. He was one of the runners. Often he would sign up and volunteer for that duty, where he would run messages up along the front trench lines, which was, other than being a fighter pilot, that was one of the most dangerous darn jobs in the war, because you're running, right out kind of behind no man's land, delivering these little messages and stuff on the front, and the whole time enemy snipers are shooting at you. One time he was actually out in a charge in no man's land, and he fell into like a crater out there by an artillery blast. And I guess the story goes that a British sergeant had him pinned down and like found him there and was ready to kill him. But for some reason, that sergeant didn't shoot him. He just said, "Get out of here, kid," and like flagged him off and let him run back to his trenches. Now, how different might history have been if that British sergeant had taken that shot rather than, showing mercy on the young German boy? Who knows? Would somebody else have replaced Hitler, and would history planned out basically the same way, or would history be radically different? That's the what if game. We don't know, but he had multiple very close calls, but does ultimately end up surviving the war. I guess when the war ended, Hitler was actually in a German hospital. He had been hit in a gas attack and had mustard gas in his eyes. So if mustard gas was not the lethal kind of gas, but it was horrifically painful. If you got it on you, it was a blistering agent. It would make your skin like peel off. And if it got in your eyes, it was like getting shot with pepper spray, basically, where your eyes feel like they're on fire. In one account, I remember it was in Hitler's own words that he said when the announcement came through at the hospital that Germany had signed the armistice and the war was over and Germany essentially was done and starting to negotiate peace terms, I guess he fell out of his bed hysterically crying and basically had a full-on like mental breakdown because he was so invested. And my heart goes out to soldiers on both sides of the conflict back then, because these guys were all told, and he had this propaganda pumped into him that we're fighting for our very survival, that we're the best country, we're destined to win. And then I'm not saying I want Germany to win the war or that I like Hitler. Don't take it that way. But my heart does go out to those soldiers that had put everything into this war and seen so many of their friends die and had sacrificed so much. And then kind of at the end, they realized, man, it was like all for nothing. And the anger, the frustration, it's through the roof. And Hitler is especially angry and frustrated and mad after World War I. And honestly, that's a super common story. Most young men that served in the army and that were German, they felt like him. They were mad and pissed off after World War I and felt like Germany had really gotten the short end of the stick and had been screwed. So Hitler gets into politics in the 1920s. So World War I ends in 1918. Hitler's kind of a nobody for a while. He works for the German government as kind of like a spy or like a secret agent. And they send him in to infiltrate this new political party, the National Socialists, aka the Nazis. All right. Hitler goes to a few of their meetings, and he's essentially spying on them. But he starts hearing some of their speakers talk, and he's like, man, I like what these guys are saying. And essentially the Nazi ideology is very similar to what Hitler's going to go on and preach too. It was kind of the foundation of it. Very anti-Jewish, very much that Germany had been cheated out of World War I. They should have won the war, and the Allies did things to cheat them out of it. All right. The message resonates with Hitler. He actually stopped working for the German government and joins up in the Nazi party. And he quickly rises through the ranks. And then they realize not too long after that, hey, this guy is a pretty good speaker. He would get fired up at the beer hall and he would give these fiery speeches to all of his supporters, these guys in the political party with him. Well, it's not very long until the leadership of this foundling Nazi party pushes him up and kind of makes him their spokesperson. And then eventually, long story short, he ends up taking over the party. He becomes the dominant force there because he is such a powerful, good, and charismatic speaker. He had that certain charisma, I guess, where he would really suck an audience in and get them to buy into what he was saying. Now, through the 1920s, early 1920s, things are bad in Germany. Think in America, things are going great. But we came out on the winning end of World War I, and we'd only fought in it for about a year. So America looks great. We have the Roaring 20s going on. Early 1920s in Germany are rough. People are literally starving to death. Unemployment is through the roof. People don't have money. They feel ashamed of the outcome of World War I. But by the end, when you get to the second half of the 1920s, finally, that Roaring 20s that was taking place in many other places around the world starts to actually creep into Germany, and the German economy starts to get better. Well, think, as the German economy gets better, Hitler's message of being angry and mad and pissed off and trying to fire people up and get them ready to fight another war, that message was not resonating that well. As the German economy got better, Nazi party membership dropped down, conversely. But then 1929, remember back in the last quarter, I talked about the stock market crash in America, where Wall Street, the stock market crashes, and that sends America into a Great Depression. Well, that didn't just affect America. That ripples out across the world. And it does absolutely affect Germany too, because as American banks start to fail, we had given billions of dollars in loans to Germany, and immediately our banks recall those loans. Germany doesn't have the money to pay for it. So it sends their economy into a tailspin. They have massive inflation. They just have to start printing more money. And the German economy gets just decimated again and goes down into the dumps. That saves Hitler's political career. Because the German economy tanked right after the stock market crash in the 1930 election, the Nazi party membership and the seats they have in their Congress or the Reichstag start to go up. They get more seats in 32 and 33, and then in 34, they have a great election, and Hitler eventually wins the chancellorship. Sort of think of it as he's the German president. By 1934 on, that's a date I want you to write in there in your notes. 1934, that's when Hitler has locked down and consolidated power in Germany. He is pretty firmly the leader guy there, okay, which his nickname is Der Führer. Der Führer. All right. The Führer means the leader in German. Okay. So that's kind of where that comes from. If you've ever seen it in a movie. So he is locked down power by 1934. And throughout the rest of the 1930s, he continues to kind of test the Allies, and he wants to start building Germany up for another future conflict where they're going to right all the wrongs of World War I, or at least that's how they would have spun it. Now, how does he do that? The German economy was in the dumps when he came into power. By 1934, Germany actually starts to snap out of their depression really quicker than the United States did. How did that happen? Well, Hitler did a lot of things, a lot of shady things, but one thing that he did that was probably kind of, I guess, good from the German perspective at the time, he starts to restore German confidence, and he starts to rebuild the German military, and he has massive government contracts coming out where Germany starts illegally building up their army again, even though they weren't supposed to do that. And that kind of gets people back to work. It jumpstarts things, and people feel like, hey, this Hitler guy is turning things around here. He's kind of restoring our sense of pride. We feel like a powerful country again. That shoots him up, and it really firmly locks him into power, even though at that time in the late 30s or so, he still did have some enemies in Germany. He was pretty solidly locked in, but there were several times where different powerful other German people had thought about assassinating him or pulling him out of power. But more on that coming up in part 2. Now, Hitler's message that most of you are probably a little bit familiar with is he's very anti-Jewish. The Nazis are obviously, like, that name is just synonymous with racism, and specifically racism against Jews, that ethnic small minority group. Now, he blames everything. And by everything, I mean the loss of World War I, all the problems Germany had faced. He really blamed two groups for it. He says on the outside, it was the Allies. They were ganging up against us. They were plotting and conspiring, and they had this big coalition, America and France and Russia and Japan and America. They all teamed up on us and outnumbered us, and that was unfair, and they're shady and corrupt. So that's part of it. He really hates the Allies and dogs them, which is a popular thing to say in Germany at the time. He also, for whatever reason, starts to target in on the Jews. Now, the million-dollar question kids ask me every year, why did he hate the Jews? What was it about that? Why? And well, I honestly don't have a good answer for you there. Many books have been written about Hitler. Many people have studied his life. I've never really gotten a clear-cut, just like ironclad answer as to why did Hitler hate Jews. But I will tell you this. Hating Jews or being anti-Semitic was very common in Europe at that time. Actually, Germany wasn't the most anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish country going. Actually, some of the Allied countries, like in France and in Russia, the powers that had been Allied countries, the anti-Semitism was actually higher there, and Jews were very much targeted and discriminated against. And it had happened prior to this to a lesser extent in Germany, but Hitler ramps it up and takes it to the next level. Now, why does he target the Jews? Again, I don't know. I would guess it's something that got programmed into him at a young age. It was also probably starting to hang out with the National Socialists or the Nazi Party that he eventually takes over. He picks up some of that rhetoric and ideology there. But by the time he's in power, he absolutely, the key part of his message is that the Jews sabotaged Germany from within in World War I. Okay, that's the reason we lost the war, that there were sneaky, shady Jews in here in Germany that stabbed us in the back, and that ruined our chances at winning the war. That it wasn't really the German soldiers' fault. Like, his message was, German soldiers like me, we did everything we could. We sacrificed it all, and we would have won the war had it not been for those Jews doing sneaky, shady things back on the home front. Now, there's no evidence of that. That's not true. Actually, you could make a pretty strong case that, like, if you look at the Jewish population in Germany, which it was quite small, that actually in that small little core of Jews, more Jewish young boys served than other German ethnic Germans per capita or percentage-wise by numbers. So if you looked at that stat, you'd say, well, actually, the Jews did more than their fair share. And there were anti-Semitic policies already in Germany that, like, for example, a Jew couldn't go past the rank of captain in the German army in World War I. Now, you go back to World War I Germany, there were no death camps. They weren't rounding up Jews. It was nothing like that to that extreme yet. But Jews were just kind of like second-rate citizens. And there were a lot of little things that wouldn't let them kind of climb through and amass or gain more power in the military or in politics. Now, question for you here. I want you to pause for a quick second without looking it up. What percentage of the German population was Jewish when Hitler took power? Think about it. What percent of the German population was Jews in like 1934 when Hitler took over? Usually when I ask kids that, I'll hear 20%, 30%, 15%, numbers like that. It might shock you to know, I know it shocked me the first time I heard it, that Jews only made up 1% of the German population. Now, I don't have that on written down on the slide here, but I do want you to write that in. This is a little bonus thing. For those of you that listened in this far, that's going to be a quiz question, and the people that just skipped through it and didn't watch all the notes, they're not going to get that one. So Jews made up 1% of the German population. That made it easier to target them, actually, because they were such a small minority. Your average German person had never met a Jew. The Jewish communities kind of lived in small pockets in a few different big cities. So your average German person had never seen a Jew in their life. That makes it much easier to target them. And actually, they said that a lot of the Germans that lived in the cities where the Jewish neighborhoods would be, they kind of would buy into the Nazi propaganda, and they would think, yeah, those Jews are rotten and evil. I'm hearing so many bad things about them. But my Jewish neighbors, the guys over here, that live a couple blocks over, they're cool. They're an exception to the rule. But the rest of those Jews are horrible. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know, the craziness of politics and propaganda and how you can feed into it when you're not even really realizing it. All right, another reason Hitler targeted the Jews, and I would put a little note in about this too. On average, the Jews weren't rich. They were just kind of average Germans. They were shopkeepers. They worked in a factory. There were a few that were farmers. All right, they're artisans, craftsmen, that kind of stuff. However, you go back to like medieval times, or actually I'm getting ahead of myself here. There was a very, very small sliver of Jews that lived in Germany that were exceptionally wealthy. Like I'm talking about a couple families here. Why would that be? How did these small collection of Jewish families get uber wealthy? And there were some in England and France and over in America too. Well, this goes back to medieval times. So you go back hundreds of years before this. Go back to the year 1000, the year 1200, okay? Medieval Europe. The Catholic Church was in power. Catholicism was the one and only kind of religion in Europe at the time. Usury was a crime, and it would make you go to hell. What's usury? Usury is loaning money, and then when somebody pays you back, you charge them interest. Basically what every bank and lending institution in the world does today. But back at that time, usury was a crime. You couldn't charge interest by lending money. So if you were the king of France or the king of Germany or wherever, you didn't want to loan money out to people, and then because they're just going to pay you that amount back. And if you charge interest to make it profitable for you, well, now you're going to hell. So what good did that money do you? So actually, kind of by default, some of these Jewish families end up becoming the bankers of Europe, just because a lot of the Christians didn't want to do it because they were worried they'd go to hell. Well, in Judaism, usury wasn't a crime. So Jews could do that and make money off lending and not get penalized the same way medieval Christians would. So anyway, you don't have to write all that down, but just know that a few of the Jewish families in Germany were exceptionally wealthy. And Hitler also knew that, hey, if I can make this whole little 1% of the population, they're all criminals. They're the pariahs, the outcasts. If I can turn the people all against them and get it so that we can just make them criminals and confiscate all their stuff, well, then that couple families that are super wealthy bankers, I can go confiscate all of their money too and their wealth, and I can use it on whatever I want, which is exactly what Hitler does. So the Jews end up becoming the scapegoat, the Jews and the Allies. Last little point here that I'll leave you with today. So World War II breaks out in 1939, kind of late in the year in 39. And I'd heard one of my professors say in college that had Hitler died in 1938, basically a year before the war had broke out, he would probably have gone down in history as one of the best all-time German statesmen. Now, What do you think of that? Is that true? I don't know. He was already a pretty nasty guy. He said a lot of mean, rotten things, a lot of extremely racist things, especially by today's standards. But in 1938, think the Holocaust hadn't happened yet. There was no Auschwitz. There was no gas chambers. Yes, he had done some pretty rotten things to Jews in Germany, but if you look at the bigger picture, he had also kind of restored a sense of pride and nationality in Germany, and he had gotten their economy going again. So I don't know. That's a complex question there. I think definitely if I got to put somebody in a good guy or bad guy category, Hitler for sure falls into the bad guy category. But, you know, it's one of those history what ifs. What if he had died of a heart attack right before the war broke out, before the Holocaust had happened? How would history look at him? My guess is he probably wouldn't be going down as a monster. He would probably be going down as a pretty good statesman that fired up the German economy. Because if you judge him in the context of the times, most of the leadership back in that era was racist in some way, shape, or form. And that goes for American leaders, British leaders, French leaders, German leaders, etc., etc. Because remember, what was racism like 100 years ago? It's nothing like it is today. If you remember back into Q3 when I was covering the lynchings and some of that rotten stuff and Jim Crow laws, remember, racism 100-ish years ago was kind of the norm. It was accepted. It was like really embraced by a lot of people. So anyway, I think that's an important concept for you to get, that you have to look at history and understand that these different eras we look at, the times were so different. And then we look back on them and with our modern minds and think, man, they were backwards back then. But if we had grown up in those times, chances are we would have probably been just like most of the people were back then and had their attitudes. So think about what 100 years from now, what are your great grandkids going to look back at us and say, man, they were just barbarians or savages? What are the things that we're doing today that are going to be just like horrifically inappropriate 100 years from now? And with that is what I'll leave you for part one of the intro notes.